I will focus on education, which is a sector with many parallelisms with all the sectors we have been hearing about in this table, but also with some particularities, as you will see. I will structure my presentation in 3 main points. In the first part, I will try to explain why it's important governmental authority, governmental state intervention in education. Second, and this is my main point, is what are the main concerns with trade agreements in the education community. So I will focus basically on policy space, quality control, undermining development, and the trade negotiation rationale, and I will conclude. So why is it important for the state to intervene in good quality education for all? Well, first, there is one fact that education is one of the most important human and social rights, and because of this reason, this is a sufficient condition for the states to intervene in education. But more recently, more and more research is showing that education has also some very important externalities for individuals and for societies, starting with more education, greater civic engagement, the promotion of attitudes and behavior that are favorable to social cohesion, more and better research, which usually reverts in society, lower crime rates, better health and children's survival, demographic control, and a faster rate of productivity and economic growth. At the same time, there is a consensus that education is not enough. It's not about having kids in the school, years of schooling. It's also important that the education that is offered to young people, to adults, to kids, is of a good quality. And I think that it is also a central piece to understand my arguments on GATS and TISA. So the fact that education is a basic human right and it has all these externalities has traditionally supported the fact that there is a strong public policy intervention in education at all levels: education provision, regulation, quality assurance, evaluation. Also governments promoting equality of educational opportunities, so trying to really make sure that all people benefit from the same quality services, and also all these ideas are supporting the conception of education as a public good and not necessarily as an economic service. And I know that this might sound as a more philosophical point, but it has really important political implications. And 10 years ago, I was attending the UNESCO World Congress on Higher Education, which is celebrated every 10 years. And the main outcome of this conference is a final communiqué, a declaration, and I was part of, as an observer, of the debate between the members of UNESCO about this communiqué. And I had the first draft where they made this point, that trade in services is a manifestation of globalization that has caused great concern in the academic community, in particular with GATS under the World Trade Organization. Member states should not consider higher education as a commercial transaction. This point generated a great deal of debate, and in the final draft, in the final communiqué, it was not there. So there was a big push from some European countries, the US, against mostly Latin American countries, that they wanted to include this point. Finally, out of the bargain, there was some language on education being a public good, but this important point on GATS was absolutely removed. In any case, in the education community, most of the voices are critical with GATS, with TISA, although there are also some voices that are in favor, that consider that free trade can benefit education quality. This is an example, one of the few examples that after doing literature review on the topic I have found, to be honest. And basically the argument is an acritical transposition of the free trade theory to the education sector. So free trade agreements, commitments, will mean more competition will mean better productivity, and also attracting foreign investment will allow to build international education capacity, especially in poor countries. Of course, there are many reasons to be skeptical about these assumptions, and I will try to justify why. So Let's go to the second part of my presentation. What are the main concerns with trade agreements in educational governance? As I said, I will talk about policy space, quality control, development, and the negotiations rationale. I will focus on the provision of education services in primary, secondary, higher education. In the GATS and probably in TISA, you have also another chapter that is about other education services. In education, there is a big push today by international consultancy firms that are selling education reform packages, evaluation systems. So this is a big market for them, actually with important consequences when it comes to the harmonization, standardization of education. But this is something I won't talk about, but definitely is something to take into account because TISA and GATS are definitely layering the field for this new business industry in education. On policy space, I won't say so much because we have been talking a lot about it in the morning and in the afternoon, but basically it refers to the right to regulate education, which is a great concern in the context of trade negotiations. What are the main regulations that can be affected by trade agreements in education? So basically qualification requirements, international certification, subsidies, royalties, technical standards, and authorization for for-profit providers. Actually in Chile there is now a big debate about it. There is a reform in process, and after all the protests of the student movement and a big electoral debate that there was on education, the government is trying to ban the possibility of for-profit providers to operate in the education system. So we know that Chile is a very free trade friend, and it has many commitments in free trade agreements, also in the GATS, and who knows whether banning these for-profit operators will be considered a barrier to trade. Anyway, the main concern here is that the regulatory decisions in these aspects are key to define the nature and quality of educational services. And in the education community, there is a big consensus that says that these aspects are very sensitive. They should be decided by democratically elected governments or by international organizations with an education mandate, which is basically UNESCO. Quality issues are very much related to the issue of the policy space, and all of us have heard about Article 6 on domestic regulation. And we know that quality standards and regulations could be considered, according to how this article is interpreted, as a more burdensome than necessary for international trade. And there is a concern here also about the fact that very demanding quality assurance, governmental quality assurance mechanisms and systems could be challenged by the dispute settlement of the World Trade Organization. These quality issues are especially a concern in the developing world, in the sense that most developing countries, they haven't developed an appropriate and strong quality assurance mechanisms to avoid, let's say, diploma mills or very bad quality providers in their education system. And actually, the number of these diploma mills or let's say, very substandard education providers, universities, have increased a lot in many southern countries as a consequence of the increasing education demand of population and the government not really responding to this demand. And in education we have also the Mode 1, that is an increasing business, in the sense that there are more and more for-profit educational providers at a distance, e-learning and this type of universities. Actually, the biggest university in the world is the Phoenix University, which is a totally e-learning university. And regulation in this of quality in this particular mode is especially confusing, and there is a lot of confusion and uncertainty especially in developing countries. It's not clear who should be certifying these this type of education and how to really regulate the quality, who should do that, whether it's the country of origin or the country that is buying the services. Finally, in relation to quality issues, I think that it's important to say that there is a sort of trade-off in education, at least, between quality and free trade. We know that the comparative advantage theory considers that free trade will generate more efficiency. We were talking about efficiency before when talking about health. Also, some people consider that free trade competition will mean innovation in the education sector. However, in a global education market, we are observing that many providers, when they are competing, when they are going for efficiency, they are doing this via price, and they are doing this via resources rationalization. And this conception of efficiency can really affect, in a very negative way, education quality, because it usually translates into paying teachers poorly. We have to take into account that in most education systems, the budget of education, 80–90% of the budget goes to teacher salaries. So if you want to become more efficient, this is where probably you will cut. And of course, if teachers are paid poorly, it won't be possible for the system to attract the best professionals to teaching. And of course, obsolete technology, substandard libraries and laboratories are also a way of reducing the cost of the service in a context of free trade competition. I will skip this example because I want to make sure I have time. Third point, the concerns of development. Who is benefiting from free trade in education? There is not so much data about who is really benefiting from trade flows in education, at least, but we have data from MO2, which is the international students. This is the list of the top 10 exporters of education, and as you can observe, there is no any developing country included in this list. Actually, if you look at the list of the top 10 exporters from the south, all of them are almost net exporters, net importers of education, even if they are those that attract more students, usually from countries from the region, not from the south, not from the north. These countries have a trade balance that is usually negative, because they end up sending more students abroad than attracting them. And I think that, to don't extend so much in this point, Philip Albach's work is very useful to summarize what are the main concerns from the point of view of development. Philip Albach is a professor at the Boston College and one of the first scholars looking at gaps in education, and he says that if educational borders are completely open, the strongest and wealthiest education providers will have unrestricted access. Countries and institutions that cannot compete will find it difficult to flourish. This means that developing countries and smaller industrialized nations will be at a considerable disadvantage. Local academic institutions will find it difficult to compete with providers that choose to set up institutions in their country. And let me finish with the final point, that is about the negotiations rationale. And I think that it is something that maybe we haven't talked so much in this forum. And I think it's important in the case of public services like education, because the people that is negotiating this type of agreements, they don't have necessarily a background on health, on education. They have and it's quite normal, they have a background on trade, economics, even sometimes diplomacy. And the way they negotiate education is not necessarily related to what are the main needs or the potential of their educational systems. And I think that here is also interesting to point out to the fact that it's not even free trade the main rationale how most countries negotiate education, or most sectors, even out of the GATT, also in the GATT. And there is an author that I really like, Paul Krugman, that he says that more than the free trade rationale, we should think about a more mercantilist one. And I think that this quotation summarizes this very well. Anyone who has tried to make sense of international trade negotiations eventually realizes that they can only be understood by realizing that they are a game scored according to mercantilist rules. in which an increase in exports is a victory and an increase in imports is a defeat. I have elaborated, sorry for the marketing, these arguments in a book that came in 2010. You can buy it on commercial basis, but if you are interested, I can send you some chapters for free. But anyway, my main thesis here is that I really support the idea of, after doing a lot of interviews in the WTO, that mercantilism is the main rationale. And how does this translate into the education negotiations? Basically, with the idea that education is a bargaining chip. And this means that most countries are open to open education if another country opens a sector where they have a comparative advantage. So imagine that you are from Guatemala, a negotiator from Guatemala, you are fine with opening education to Europe, to the US, as far as they open agriculture to the Guatemalan exporters. And I have many interview quotations that really reflect on this idea. This is one negotiator from a country I cannot say, but it doesn't matter. We always perceive services as a bargaining chip. So he was very open. I didn't invent this label, actually. We could make concessions if we get something back. That is our basic logic for negotiating services. The premise that liberalization is good doesn't work with us. We do not believe in this doctrine. In fact, this discourse sets my nerves on edge. Here nobody believes it. Not even their preachers believe it. I have many examples of this, and this is a negotiator from another country. Because of the quotation, maybe it's easier to identify from which country. But again, this idea that we are not going to open education without receiving something in exchange. And this idea also came in another interview I did in Geneva. So there's always this idea of treating education as a bargaining chip. To conclude, education is a social right with very positive externalities for individuals and societies. We justify public intervention to promote quality education worldwide. Internationalization, mobility and exchange of scholars, students can contribute greatly to quality education. Problems come when internationalization in education is driven by free trade rules and the logic of profit. And as we have seen, such rules have the potential to undermine education quality procedures, education development processes, and overall, the democratic control of education systems. Thank you very much.